Hello everyone, my name is Preston Dennett and today's topic is extraterrestrial miners. These are cases in which UFOs have hovered over mines, not only hovered actually, but landed, and some cases involve humanoids. A number of these mines have been visited repeatedly. Some of these mines are being physically affected. So this involves cases of the first, second, and third kind by the Hynek system. Photographs have been taken on a number of occasions, so these are really impressive cases. They've been occurring all over the world for more than 70 years, and I've been looking into it for a while, and just it's getting incredibly complicated. So this is what the topic is about today, cases of UFOs showing interest in our minds. I found about 30 cases involving simple sightings. I'll start with those and then move on to the cases involving what I would call close encounters of the second kind, where they affect the environment. Move on to cases involving mines that have been visited repeatedly. And finally, we'll cover the humanoid cases. So starting with sightings, yeah, they've occurred all across the United States. Here's a case from Texas. This is the Luminant Liberty Lignite mine in Tatum, Texas. Lignite is brown coal. This occurred on August 22nd, 2019, and comes from the files of MUFON. And I'll just read you the report directly from the witness. This is the witness talking. I work at a lignite mine in East Texas, and I was working the night shift when I saw several lights fly down, hover, and appear to inspect our dragline equipment. The lights moved back and forth, hovered, and ejected smaller lights. The lights appeared around 5:24 a.m. in Tatum, Texas, over the Luminant Liberty mine. I've worked out here at various mines for over 20 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Another case that occurred in Texas occurred in an area known as Van Horn. This was on June 9th, 1970, when a group of kids saw a cornucopia-shaped object landed in the area of the mines near their home. And it stayed there for just a little while when it lifted up and kind of disappeared by blending into the sky. But it wasn't long after that a second object appeared. This one was rectangular, and a bright rectangular light came real low, flashed, and then lifted up and disappeared. So what's interesting about this case is this area of Van Horn, Texas. It is very rich in a wide variety of minerals. It includes over 100 mines, and some of the minerals and metals being mined out of this area include mica, talc, soapstone, copper, manganese, lead, uranium, zinc, asbestos, fluorite, gypsum, anhydrite, gold, and barium. Yeah, well over 100 mines, all kinds of minerals. It's no wonder the UFOs are showing an interest in this area. Here's a very interesting case, which comes from the files of MUFON. This occurred on July 13th, 2013, and involves a UFO photograph. And I will just read the witness's testimony directly, and I'm quoting. I was going on a camp retreat, and we had never been to Colorado. As we went through this little town called Frisco, I decided to take pictures of the old gold mine that was there. We were on our bus still, and as I was going through my pictures, I noticed that there was this black disc-looking object. As I zoomed in, I couldn't believe my eyes. I knew it was a UFO, and being that it appeared out of nowhere, the photos I had taken seconds before that one had no black disc in them, just that very one. Another mine that's generating a lot of recent interest because of UFO activity is the Board Camp Crystal Mine in Board Camp, Arkansas. The owners, Orville and Cheryl Murphy, have finally decided to go public because they've had so many strange events, which include rocks that seem to levitate and move by themselves, weird flashes of light, and a number of UFO sightings. MUFON did actually do some research into this area, as well as Josh Gates of Expedition Unknown, who also did some research and apparently saw a UFO. MUFON's researcher Chase Koletsky was there. And the owners, Orville and Cheryl Murphy, are now going public and trying to figure out the mystery of why UFOs are so attracted to this crystal mine. It's just another case, I think, where UFOs are showing an interest in metals. Here's another case from upstate New York, an abandoned mine in Harriman State Park in Mahwah, New Jersey, New York, the border right there. It occurred at 10:30 p.m. on March 6, 2011. This is a report from the National UFO Reporting Center. A gentleman wrote in to report his sighting he had while he was on a night hike. He was climbing up this trail and saw a very bright light. He reached the top of the trail and saw this bright disk about 35 yards away, hovering over what appeared to be a mine shaft. And apparently he actually took some film of this. I don't have the film, but I do have his eyewitness testimony, which I'd like to read to you here. As I saw it, I yelled out loud. The disk took off instantly from the ground with no noise, more rapid than anything I have ever seen. It was the size of a Black Hawk helicopter, and as it pushed off the ground, it displaced all of the air in the area, making a soft wind. When I went to the spot about 35 yards away, it was hovering over what I thought was an abandoned mine shaft. You can't even see the bottom of this shaft, and it's on old government land. I have absolutely perfect video and sound of this. What do I do? Is the government going to come after me for sending it to you? I need you to see this so you can tell me what the hell I should do. So many cases coming in from all over the world. Another area that's known for UFO activity in upstate New York does have a lot of mines. There was a huge wave of sightings there in the early and mid to 1980s. This is up in Pine Bush, New York. It's a very well-known hotspot. Around the 1980s, Ellen Crystal joined up with Harry Liebelson of Omni Magazine, and they started doing UFO stakeouts in this area. Ellen Crystal ended up writing a book about her experiences called Silent Invasion, and she thinks it has something to do with the mines in this area because she learned from residents that these UFOs were hovering over the areas where there was a lot of mines, and they could hear strange drilling noises. On occasion, during her stakeouts, Ellen Crystal saw bright arc lights coming from the ground, or even felt strange blasts of air coming from below, from the ground. And she learned that this is one of few locations where there's some very rare elements, including beryllium, zirconium, and titanium, all of which are ores that are very useful for the production of nuclear power and used in nuclear engineering. So she speculates that perhaps ETs are mining this area and using it to build alien bases. And she's not the only one. Philip Imbrogno, he was probably the chief investigator of the Hudson Valley UFO sightings. He wrote a book about it as well, along with J. Allen Hynek. And he also discovered a definite link between UFO activity and mines. He was contacted by a CIA agent who told him that ETs have bases in Orange, Putnam, and Ulster counties. He was intrigued by a letter in June 1984 in the New York Post, which read as follows, and I'm quoting, "Why are people seeing all these UFOs all of a sudden in the Hudson River Valley area? The answer is simple. There seems to be some kind of underground activity in the Brewster area in the old abandoned iron ore mines. Some years ago, the government went out of its way to purchase the land that the mines are located on, and the people who live in the area, including myself, have seen military vehicles entering the dirt roads. They never come out." Philip and Brogno did some research and learned that, in fact, the government had purchased land around Brewster and Putnam Valley and Lake Carmel. And regarding this whole area, the Pine Bush area, he also speculates the ETs are mining rare minerals and building bases. Wouldn't surprise me a bit, considering the amount of activity that's going on across the world. There are a couple of cases from New Mexico, which is also very rich in various elements. One case occurred on April 22nd, 1958, at the Ambrosia Lake uranium mines. These involved two guards who are guarding the slag heap there. Their names are Tom Reeder and James Turbin. They're security guards at the Ambrosia Lake uranium area. And while on guard on April 22nd, 1958, they observed this very bright light land on the mesa next to them. It was some distance away, but it stayed there for several hours, and then finally at one point rose up into the air, at which point it became brighter and brighter until it was too bright to look at, and then it zipped away, changing in color from white to red initially, and then blue as it moved off. So they reported this to their boss, and he believed them and described them as being definitely highly trained and reliable observers. Another case from New Mexico occurred at the Chino copper mine. This is in Bayard, New Mexico. It occurred not too long ago, April 7th, 2014. The witness is himself a mine employee, and he gave a very lucid account, so I'll just read to you his report. This is the witness talking. I work at the Chino copper mine in Bayard, New Mexico. We work half the month night shifts, and in my 10 years there I have never seen anything like this. At 7:30 p.m. on April 7, 2014, me and my supervisor were in the pit and noticed a bright star-like object appear to the north. It was moving at a rate of speed that is not humanly possible. It traveled almost directly from north to south and covered the whole sky from the north horizon to south horizon in about 7 seconds. It was about the height that jets and commercial planes fly. The object was super bright, like a star, but a clear, bright color, about twice the brightness of Mars. I got out of my pickup truck to listen as it passed over us, and it made no sound. We also worked night shift last night. I was working in the office when I heard over the radio one of the employees call his supervisor to see if he was seeing what he was. He said just east of the mine, around an area known as the Kneeling Nun, there were 3 star-like objects that were hovering and circled each other, then merged and shot off. He did not know of the sighting we had on the 7th, and he described the same light what we saw. He witnessed it around 5:45 a.m., around dawn. I do not know if there is a pattern of dusk and dawn, but these lights are really scaring me a little. Either the government has developed technology way ahead of their time, or we are really not alone. I would love for there to be an investigation. So yeah, that's directly from the mine employee himself, involving 2 sightings, one after another. He's now gotten a camera just in case there's another sighting. Another case from the United States occurred at the old Rowley copper mine. This is at 9:30 a.m., a morning daylight sighting, August 16th, 1965, or thereabouts. This is in Shady Cove, Oregon. And 2 of the miners saw what they described as a glassy white object. It was just hovering in place. They first thought it might be a balloon until they could see it was actually rotating in place, when suddenly it started wobbling and darting back and forth for about 2 minutes, and then it moved off to the west. They thought it was gone, but a short time later a plane was flying over the mine, and this object reappeared, and it would follow the plane for a little bit, and it started doing flips and turning up and down and all these maneuvers, and then shot straight off. I don't think it's a coincidence that there's so many objects hovering over mines. Here's another case This occurred on October 6th, 2009 at Ruth, Nevada copper mines. And I'll just read to you from the witness's testimony. Here's the witness talking. I am a truck driver at an open pit copper mine in Ruth, Nevada, just east of Ely, Nevada. On the night of October 6th, at about 9 p.m., I was traveling east onto one of the dumps where we are dumping waste rock, and I was looking directly east over the Shell Creek range of the mountains. As I looked, I saw what appeared to be a very bright star just a few degrees above the horizon. Then the star blossomed up into a sparkling orange sphere and brightened considerably. The object was still stationary at this point and then disappeared. He radioed to other people at the mine and they saw it too. And as the witness says, it was by far the strangest thing I have ever seen, and it left me with questions I will never be able to answer. To put it in one word, wow. I was not the only witness on my crew. An equipment operator who was working on the dump saw the phenomenon twice, and another truck driver also witnessed the event once. So apparently this is something that's being repeated at the same mine. Another case, a really incredible case really, is from the Bingham copper mines, which this case is from MUFON. It occurred on July 10th, 2005 at Bingham, Utah. And yeah, the Bingham copper mines are one of the largest man-made excavations in the entire world. So this is definitely an important event, and I'll just read to you the eyewitness testimony. We were approaching the Bingham copper mine pit and were on a limited access road. It was mid-morning and we were driving quite slow with the windows down and the radio off. As we started toward the top of the hill, a large dark shadow came over the mountain to the west of us and covered the entire car. We initially thought it was a cloud, but the shade was much darker than what cloud can provide, and the edges were crisp and defined in a circle. There was no noise, and when we looked out the windows up into the sky, the disk shot over the car, as if startled, and zipped across the valley to hover above the city below. It stayed motionless for about 15 seconds and then just disappeared. We didn't see it move off or anything. It just wasn't there anymore. So there's case after case of this all across the United States. Here's one from Carbondale, Pennsylvania, involving an anthracite coal mine, an abandoned strip mine. This is on May 24th, 1977, near Scott Township, Pennsylvania, Carbondale. This report does come from MUFON, and the witness reported seeing this object move over his home toward Carbondale, and he later heard rumors that this object had actually crashed into a water-filled strip mine, and that red and green lights were seen flashing in the water. Apparently the military showed up, cordoned off the area, and a flatbed truck was later seen carrying something hidden under a tarp. It was oval in shape, and this truck was traveling down Route 6. Of course, the implication is that a UFO was recovered from this strip mine. The next news report that came out said that these lights that were seen were actually a railroad lantern, but the witness who reported this case to MUFON says that that's not a good explanation because railroad lanterns don't flash, and this object was reported being a flashing light. So yeah, this is kind of a third-hand case without any real investigation to it of a possible crash retrieval. But it's definitely fitting the pattern of what we're seeing in these cases where UFOs come over mines, abandoned or not. They are very interested, and it's not only in the U.S., it's all across the world. Here's a bunch of cases from various places other than the United States. One occurred in Hermosillo, Mexico, Hermosillo. This is at the White Mine Ranch. It occurred on March 22nd, 1959. This was just before midnight when engineer Francisco Cantu Castro and his fellow co-workers Marcelino Soares and Francisco Gutierrez Carranza were driving down the road approaching the mine when the road was blocked by a blue light hovering very close to the ground. It was a very brilliant, bright blue light blocking the road. They were naturally very reluctant to go forward, too afraid to approach, until finally this thing took off. And one of the witnesses, Marcelino Soares, reported it to authorities. In this case, it eventually made it to the files of APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization run by Jim and Coral Lorenzen. Number of cases from South America. One occurred in Chile in April 2013, in North Chile at the Collahuasi copper mine. This involved a metallic-looking saucer which was hovering at very low altitude over the mine. 4 technicians viewed this. One of them had a camera and was able to capture a number of pictures of this object. They described it as a flattened disc, brilliant in color, about 30 feet wide. They were interviewed by a local UFO group, but they did not want to go public because they feared ridicule. But it's a good case and one of several in which photographs were taken of these objects hovering over mines. Here's a very interesting case which occurred in the Peruvian Andes at the Catalina Huanca silver lead mine. This was in 1961 near the Rio Pampamarca area at Opango in the Peruvian Andes. Again, this is the Catalina Huanca silver mine. And I'll just tell you the report directly from the witness, or part of it. This is the witness talking. I was a geologist, 30 years old at the time, working for Marcona Mining Company of San Francisco at its iron mine on the coast of Peru, 250 miles south of Lima. A Peruvian friend, Manuel Montiel, was also working at the mine in the electrical department. He asked me to accompany him on a weekend visit to a small but rich lead-silver mine located high in the Andes. The owner, Gustavo Hernandez, wanted the opinion of a geologist as to the visibility and potential of the mine which he had opened only 2 years earlier. So the geologist joined his friend Manuel Montiel and went up to this mine. It was a long, winding road, very treacherous. It soon became nothing more than a trail. And he got there, and this is when he learned this incredible story about this UFO that had appeared there only a short time earlier, a few weeks earlier. A typical classic flying saucer appeared over the mine and just parked stock still for about 15 minutes, at which point it started moving around, and it maneuvered around the mine for the entire day. This was a classic flying saucer. It was glowing, round, with portholes, and it was viewed by more than 70 people. 70. That's how long it stayed. And what's even more amazing is what happened the next day. A truck filled with ore was leaving the mine, and they reported that this object followed them for, quote, several hours as it drove the long road down away from the mine. So it followed them basically all the way down the mountain. An amazing case. Here's another case which occurred in New Caledonia. I didn't even know where New Caledonia was. Turns out it's east of Australia, north of New Zealand, out there in the South Pacific. And it's not a large area. It's kind of a small island, part of France, I believe. But it does have a number of mines, including a gypsum mine. And one evening in January 1954, the caretaker at the gypsum mine saw this brilliant, luminous yellow light, very large, hovering at a low level over the mine. Hovered for a full 20 minutes before suddenly zipping away. But as it was hovering over the mine, it was pulsating. What's interesting about this case is he's not the only witness. There was people in 2 separate locations nearby who also saw this activity. There's a case which comes from India, which has a number of mines. This case involves the Bihar mica mine. It occurred on September 15, 1954 in Hanboon, Bihar, India. The manager of the of the mica mine. His name is Mr. Chatterjee. He and hundreds of other witnesses watched this saucer-shaped object descend to an altitude of only 500 feet. The UFO hovered for just not very long, then soared upwards at great speed, at which point it caused a big gust of wind. And what's interesting about this case is more than 800 people saw it, and the speculation is that this object was mostly interested in the mine which has supplied beryllium for the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. So we know UFOs are all about atomics, and they're definitely hovering over mines which have minerals used in the production of atomic materials. Many cases, here's a couple from Canada. This next case occurred on April 12th, 1953 at the Frood Strobe mine. This is a location in Coniston in Sudbury, Ontario, Canada. This area is very, very active with UFO activity, as we'll see later on when we get to the more extensive cases. This is a simple sighting over the Frood Strobe mine. It involved a shining cigar-shaped object. 6 miners observed this object hovering over the mine for about 20 minutes. They also drove through the town of Coniston, which is a smelter town, and saw it to the west. This object changed shape and color, and earlier in February, had been a wave of sightings in which people in Coniston, the town itself, saw this silvery torpedo-shaped object moving over the town. So, yeah, this is a mining town and a mine that are both receiving sightings. Another area in Canada which has had a really dramatic sighting over a mine is Fort William, Ontario, Canada. This is at the Steep Rock Iron Mine. This occurred on March 28, 1953, when about 20 workers were in the mine pit, way down deep at the bottom, when this 50 to 80 foot round white object swooped down to within 250 feet over the ore pile. So mind you, this thing has to actually dive down into the ore pit itself. And Sven Knutson, one of the drill foremen at the mine, along with a number of the other people, said he thought it was going to crash. That's how low this thing was. And as it's flying out, it sends off this brilliant flash of light. Some of the miners thought it had actually exploded, because if you saw what looked like fragments of metal falling to the ground, and this thing just darts off, zips away very quickly, and was seen in the area by other people as far away as Lakehead, Terrace Bay, and Atikokan. So it was a pretty widespread sighting, but definitely targeted the mine. Allegedly, there's another case that occurred at the Divik diamond mines. I'm not too sure about the source on this one. It does involve a photograph in which taken by a miner, allegedly. This occurred in September 2012, when mine workers observed this large lenticular-shaped object sending down beams of light. And one of the workers took this picture. I am unsure about the source, wasn't really able to track it down, but for what it's worth, the Divik diamond mine is a very large mine. It's produced one of the largest diamonds in North America, and wouldn't surprise me a bit if it's attracting UFO activity, because we see UFOs hovering over all different kinds of mines. There's a number of cases which occurred in Africa. Here's a case that generated a lot of interest with the U.S. government. This occurred on 1952 at the Belgian Congo mines, when this UFO was hovering at very low level over these uranium mines. And it was staying there for about 15 minutes, just doing these elegant curves and changing their positions until finally the witness, Commander Pierre, who's a pilot, decides he's going to scramble his fighter plane and chase after these things, which he does. And he's unable to get to them because they easily evade him. Each time he gets close, they drop down to about 60 feet above treetop level. And they're moving at least 800 miles per hour, he estimates. This case is very interesting because we now have documents from the CIA released through the Freedom of Information Act that prove that this event in fact happened, and that the CIA themselves considered this witness very reliable. Remember, this is at a time, early 1950s, when our government is basically covering this subject up very actively. Another case which occurred in Africa occurred in Kitwe, North Rhodesia, in July 21st, 1957, now known as Zimbabwe. This involves the Kitwe copper mine. A bunch of copper miners at this mine saw this number of saucers darting around so fast they had like tails of plasma coming off of them. And they believed that these objects were visitors from outer space spying on them because they were interested in the uranium that's being mined from this area. Another case occurred 1 month later, August 1957, at the Shabani area of Rhodesia, same area, of South Africa, at the Sabi gold mine. And this involved a very dramatic sighting in which a large group of workers became terrified when this very bright flaming object came swooping down, hovering over the mine, illuminating everything in sight. All the mine workers hid in the engine room. Some of them were screaming, "God has come." They were so frightened. And it's a very dramatic case involving a very large number of witnesses. And that's what we're seeing in a number of these mine cases. Very low-level sightings, very widely viewed. Here's another bunch of cases from Australia. Probably one of the most famous is the Para-Burdoo iron mine sightings. This is a small mining town of about 2,500 residents in the Pilbara region of Western Australia, north of Perth, and about 950 miles northeast of Perth. This case comes from researcher Ellis Taylor, who had been receiving multiple accounts of UFOs hovering over the Para-Burdoo iron mine. And one of the best cases that he references occurred on August 30th, 2006, involving a family. Rob and Jules are the couple, and their children all observed this flashing light. They watched it move over the town kind of lazily, and then starts moving up Radio Mountain, where the Para-Burdoo Mountain is located, finally reaches the top where the mine is, and just hovers there. It's just this bright, flashing light. And he actually photographed this object as it hovered there for about 10 minutes, and finally it turned red, and it moves straight upwards until it's a tiny red dot and disappears into outer space. So Rob's neighbor, Dave, who was also there, turns to everyone and says, "I think we've just been visited by aliens." So yeah, there was a lot of witnesses. As Ellis Taylor says, they are a tight-knit community, born from their isolation where get-togethers over a cold beer or 10 and a Barbie are everyday occurrences. They are good people, honest and down to earth. They don't waste their words, and if they say they saw something, they did. The witnesses, Rob and Jules, they say, and I'm quoting, "This experience for us was the most awesome thing we have ever seen in our lives, as we do believe we are not alone." So that's just one Australia case. Here's another Australia case, December 8th, 1979, at the Thaduna Open Cut Mine. This was reported in the Herald Sun in Melbourne, Australia, in December 1970. It occurred on December 8th at Meekatharra, which is about 120 miles southeast and 500 miles north of Perth. The camp supervisor, Mr. Murphy, and several other mine workers saw this oval-shaped white-orange object hovering over the mine. This was at like 3 a.m. It hovered there for about 2 hours. The night shift guard saw it first, and he started waking everyone else up so they could see this thing. And it stayed there for a very long time. It was making a very loud hissing noise. Stayed for 2 hours, and at one point went from the north end of the mine to the south end of the mine as if examining it, and finally took off. As Mr. Murphy, the mine supervisor, says, I don't believe in little green men, but he had to admit that something, perhaps from outer space, was watching them work. A real recent case from Australia occurred on July 28th, 2019, not that long ago, at the mine site at Middlemount, Queensland, Australia. What's interesting about this case is there were photos taken. This case was investigated by Brad Morris and Keith Basterfield, prominent researchers. It involved a bunch of workers who were working at this mine on July 28th. They saw this object. It was early morning. It was a white-gray object come swooping very low over the mine mound. And the next day, same witnesses saw this object return. And it was a much more dramatic encounter. At some point it landed at a distant location, took off again, was darting around the sky, was changing shape and hovering in place. It changed from a pyramid to a triangle to a disc, and stayed there for 30 minutes, long enough for them to take some videotape of this object or photographs. So it's one of many cases in which these objects land, they hover very low, and photographs are taken. But these are basically close encounters of the first kind. I'm going to move on now to an even more interesting type of cases, the close encounters of the second kind. I love these cases because they actually affect the mines themselves. This case comes from Scott Corrales and occurred at the Gualcamayo gold mines at San Juan province of Argentina. This is an open pit heap leach mine. The case occurred on December 20th, 2008, when 20 mine workers were on their break and had walked away from the mine and were about to start their break when this object showed up over the mine. One of them was actually able to take a photograph of it. Meanwhile, it hovers over the mine itself where a bunch of other workers, about 25 other workers, saw it. It was very low, and it makes this very loud buzzing noise. At this point, all of the machinery fails on the mine. All work, all drilling comes to a complete stop as this object hovers there. Not for long, and shortly after hovering there, it takes off, at which point all the electricity and all the machinery worked fine again. So it was a very dramatic case, photographed, witnessed by dozens of mine workers. It, of course, made the local newspapers who tried to debunk it. In fact, the newspapers called it, quote, a service balloon, and one even joked that it was a garbage bag flying aloft in search of fame. It's absurd because this thing actually caused the mine to fail, all the electricity, and it's not the only case where this has happened. But here's one of my favorite cases. It's really quite bizarre. This occurred at the Spring Creek Mine. This is at Spring Creek Ridge in the Selway Wilderness outside of Twin Falls, Idaho. This case was investigated by Jim and Cora Lorenzen and other researchers. The main witness is Buzz Montag, who finally contacted the Jim and Cora Lorenzen because he had seen UFOs over this area a number of times throughout the early 1960s. But the real incident he contacted them about occurred in 1965 when Buzz Montag and his friend William Andrews were out there hunting and had been camping on a bluff that overlooks the Spring Creek Mine. And they were surprised to see this bright silver object hovering at a very low level over the ore dump. And this is, not valuable ore. This is waste matter, often called tailings, in which all of the useful ore has already been extracted. So it's strange that the UFO is hovering over, this waste dump. And they got out their hunting rifles, which have a 10-power telescope, and looked close up at these things, and were able to see that these objects had little arms and were scooping up the waste matter, the rock. And looking up in the sky, they saw there was 3 other objects, a total of 4 of these little saucer-shaped objects, and one very large cigar-shaped object with portholes. All of these were perfectly silent. The large object was much higher, about 1,000 feet high, which really isn't very high at all. and the smaller objects were at ground level. And I'll just read the report from Jim and Cora Lorenzen. Protruding from the top of the objects were 4 hose-like devices which were inserted into the slag piles and were moving around. After a period of time, one by one, the objects elevated and ascended into the air. At this time, the large object was spotted. It had 4 depressions on its underside. When the small objects reached the object, they fitted themselves into the depressions, after which there was no indication that there had been a depression there to begin with. After another short period of time, the objects detached themselves from the cigar-shaped craft and returned to the slag heap. So these 2 guys, Buzz Montag and William Andrews, watched this for over an hour as these 4 smaller objects made 4 separate trips down to this slag heap, pulling debris out of it and returning it to the mother ship. At one point, all 4 objects rose upward and attached themselves to those little depressions in the craft, and this object moved off. It's a very strange case, but really quite incredible that they were interested in this slag heap. But they do seem to be very interested in it for whatever reason. So this next series of encounters is definitely the most complicated of them all. It involves a number of objects affecting this area in a number of different ways. This is basically the Sudbury area of Ontario, Canada, over a number of different mines, but particularly the Algoma Nordic mine and this nickel smelting plant in Sudbury, Ontario. And it's really incredible how many cases there are and how they've affected this area. There's a case where it's followed a train, cases where it's hovering over slag heaps, where it's investigating the smokestacks, where it's hovering over the water tanks, where it's draining electricity from power lines, it's causing power failures. So it's a hugely complicated series of encounters, and I'm going to do my best to relate them here. First case I'd like to talk about comes from Donald Campbell, and he relates this incident in which a UFO hovered over the Inco mines and over the slag heaps for a period of hours. So here's him talking.
Okay, this is Don Campbell from 488 Telstar Avenue, Sudbury, Ontario, Moonglow subdivision. I was a welder for 25 years at Inco, and the last 10 years before I took my pension. In 85 I was a foreman, supervisor, teacher, and finally a head foreman for the Coppercliff welding shop with 72 people under me. I'm going to relate a few stories and things that have personally happened to me over the years, especially in 1967. We were at work this day on day shift, and I was tacking jobs in the plate shop when one of the welders happened to be standing out near the back door having a smoke and noticed this beautiful silver disc. It apparently was about 5-6 miles high over the tracks where we dump our slag, and drew everybody's attention. Hey guys, come on out and see this beautiful silver looking thing. And we're all pointing up and at it, and even then some people said, gee, I wonder, is it a floating balloon or anything? One of the welders was smart enough to tack a little stick on the back door, which is permanently held open for trains going in and out bringing plates. He nailed a stick as a gun sight and aimed it over as you would a gun barrel, and aimed it over the edge of the door right at this silver balloon, or what we thought may be a silver balloon. This was at 10 o'clock in the morning. People were talking about it. Elwood Tresize, who was the foreman in the shop at that time, phoned in the station, told them about this, and they said, yes, we've got many calls about it. People in Sudbury were looking up. We were looking up. This went on till approximately 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But before 2 o'clock, I was so excited. Owning a telescope at home, I decided to get sick early and headed for my home. By the time I got home and looked up in the direction that the balloon should have been, it was no longer there. Not for 1 minute did I think it was a balloon. It was a beautiful silver disc shining in the sun. It hadn't moved in the 4-hour period, so we knew darn well that a balloon would slowly drift, but this thing had stayed there. It was gone. So the next day I related this to my fellow welders and plate workers out there, and they said, oh yeah, it was there, and it just zoomed away and it was gone in a matter of 2 seconds, a couple of blinks of the eye, and it was gone. The follow-up in the Sudbury Star the following day, many phone calls to stations and the Sudbury Star. Turns out that the Air Force says all this was a weather balloon taking up information of ionosphere and stratosphere conditions, and that nothing to worry about, it's not a UFO, and that it just drifted away on its own. And when questioned, they said, well, how come it stayed in the same place for 4 hours over Coppercliff? They said it was a weather inversion, and it was held there by a pocket of air that was not moving. And then some people said, well, how come it could fly away all of a sudden? They had no answer for that.
Here's another case related by Donald Campbell involving over 50 mine employees who saw an object hovering over the Inco nickel mines.
Another incident, my brother-in-law, Art Seguin, who's worked up at Elgome Nordic for 20-some years, up at Elliott Lake Mine, practically from the day it opened. He's retired now. I didn't personally see this myself, but there was about 50 mine workers going in through the gates early in the morning. I guess they go on shift like we do at Coppercliff, probably 7:15, 7:30 to be changed and in their work clothes to go down the mine for 8 o'clock. They have to be on duty by 8, and lo and behold, this is a beautiful, clear summer morning, and everybody's looking up over the parking lot right near the gate. The sergeant's at the gate looking at the passes, same way as we do at Coppercliff, and a UFO is sitting there. No sound, beautiful silver craft, the sun bouncing off its body early in the morning. Quite a sight, and Art related this to me. And there's at least 50 people, and this hit the Elliott Lake Press locally about all the men seeing it at the mine at this time, their local little paper, but it didn't get into Toronto or Globe and Mail or, our local papers, a big write-up about Elliott Lake miners seeing this, but it was the talk of Elliott Lake for quite a while.
Here's another case involving an Inco nickel mine employee who had a very scary encounter in which he was beamed by a UFO. Again, this incident is related by Donald Campbell, who has become something of a whistleblower with all of this. He was initially ridiculed, by the way. People called him UFO Don, but soon he had revenge because all these incidents started happening. So here's Donald describing this amazing incident.
An incident that happened at Inco, I believe, was in 1969 while I was still in the welding shop. I was on 4 to 12, and there's a lot of sample house people doing the concentrator and sample house from the converter aisle, grinding samples of nickel ore after it's cooled down to see what the waste content is. And Jimmy Shrigley, who was a acetylene welder in the welding shop, had a son. I don't recall his first name, but he was a Shrigley, working in the sample house. And Shrigley, before he left Inco, was the full 65 years old, and his son was about 38 to 40 when this incident happened. He was going from the concentrator back to the sample house, which is just above, around 1 or 2 converter up on the next level. And as he's carrying the pails, he looks up, he feels this funny feeling, and he looks up and he feels this heat beaming down, and then a light came on, and the light came right down on him. He looked up. I think he almost pooped his drawers right there, because there was about a 50-foot circle. He was so frightened by this thing being right over him at the time, he dropped both his sample pails, which is about 20 pounds in each hand, and run like mad to the sample house and told the guys, come out here, look at this. They come out just in time to see the back end of the UFO slowly drift back up into the clouds. This is what frightened him so much, and the story went all over the plant the next morning on day shift, that Shrigley's son, and he related to his dad, Jimmy, the next evening was over at his dad's house and said how he'd seen the UFO, how frightened he was because he could feel the warmth off of it, the heat on his arm, hair standing up on the back of his neck, the nape of his neck was that close, and this thing turning a light on him right when he was between the concentrator and the sample house. Dropped the pails and run, and then of course he had to get his sample pails back. As soon as the thing left, went back over, picked up the sample pails, carried them in and continued his shift. This was getting near the end of the shift. Summertime again, 10:30 when it's fairly dark by 10:30 in the summer nights. And that was one of the true stories by Shrigley.
So the granddaddy of all these cases is probably the one that occurred in August 1967. This one was witnessed by Donald Campbell himself, and this occurred over the Inco smelting plant at the Copper Cliff mines in Sudbury. And in this case, a UFO hovered over the smelter plant itself and caused a power outage. And I'll just let Donald Campbell describe in his own words what he saw.
One of the good stories I like to always tell is in August of 67 on 4 to 12. I was a 3-shift welder, and 4 to 12 was our favorite shift for watching. And it was 10:20, 10:30, and I was in the welding shop this night, and I was welding. And we have an interplant phone, which is 515. The plate shop was 505. And my friend Jimmy Tomasini was ringing the phone off the wall. I guess there was 5 or 6 of us back at the plate shop. No, I was in the welding shop, he was in the plate shop. And he said, Don, he said, did you look out the front and see this UFO? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, it did a double circle around the stack. He said, I'm sure it's a UFO. A plane would never come in the grounds. It would be against the law. And he says, you better run to the front door. Just leave the phone off the hook and see if you can see it. I run to the front door, which was a couple of 100 feet, and I looked over toward the dry, just in time to see this thing hovering over near the dry. So I run back to the phone and I said, Jimmy, I'm going to run right over to the plate shop right now, where you are. And he said, oh, good, good. He says, it's definitely a UFO because I've lost track of it. And where he was in the plate shop, he could no longer see it from where I could see it out the back door. So I run across the road, put my helmet and everything down, my gear, got over to the plate shop where there was at least 8 welders. He was one of them that was working overtime that night, and plus our own gang of 10 welders, and plus 8 plate workers because some converter hoods and some other things had collapsed, the number 1 and 2 converter, and they had emergency jobs rebuilding to get these converters back into operation. So this is quite all interesting. So we all run out the back. Everybody's all excited. Hey, come on, welders, Maniego and Dubois and Kelly and everybody that was in there, we're calling them all. Come on to the back door and come and see what's over the dry. So we angle our lookout and we go out in the back tracks, and we're all out the back door. Some guys are smoking, some aren't. We're all looking, and it's just hovering there over the dry. And this got us quite excited. Then it started to approach our shop. So we were waiting, and it's coming down, it's coming down. It's not, it's barely moving, like not even 30 miles an hour, maybe 10, 15, just coming down. We say, my God, this thing is so low. You know, we think it's going to get caught in the hydro lines, because we got all these electric poles up for the electric trains. And we think, and we say, well, it isn't that low. It must be 10 feet. It must be missing the post by 10 feet. Well, you wouldn't have an airplane flying over darkness at 10, 15 feet over hydro poles with high current line. It's coming, and it's off to our left, and it's a gorgeous sight. Here's the little red light on the front, and a green light, you know, and the red light is pulsating, the green light is on steady. We can't tell the back from the front of this craft, because we can see it's an oval shape. We're not directly underneath it, but we're almost at an angle. So we watch it as it goes by. Now it's facing directly east as it passes our eyesight from the back door, and the CIL building is about 800, 900 feet past the plate shop. We glance over straight east. We say, oh my God, it's going to bump right into the building. All of us, we're all watching this with great delight, and it eases right up, just beautiful in banks, just as if it's got its radar set for buildings and obtrusion. It just lifts automatically, just clears the CIL stainless steel stacks for vents. It just goes right over them at a beautiful angle, and then veers up, veers up, and veers up. I personally did not see it do the double take around the stack. This was earlier in the evening. And I didn't see it go over the concentrator because we can't see the concentrator. The concentrator, apparently, when it went over it, there was about 15 witnesses out there that were out in the backyard scraping down old Denver cell parts and everything. We found this out the next day. They had witnessed it going over there. Number 3 power station is about 1,000 feet before number 1 dry, where I changed every day. And when it went over the power station, all the knives broke open. And these were the main feed lines from number 1 power station to the concentrator. The concentrator kicked out at 10:30 that night, causing a gigantic flood, all blacked out in that area, which we didn't know at that time had happened. So anyway, Sergeant Wayman, meanwhile, after seeing all this and the thing flying away at an amazing, you know, just a blip light going up, 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 and then it became a star, and then it was gone. I'm on the phone phoning the 969, the radar, telling them just what's happened. And then they start asking questions. What condition is the sky? Or did you see this by yourself, sir? I said, oh no. I said, there's 18 or 20 of us here at least that were all watching it at the same time. We're all tradespeople. That impressed him. Meanwhile, Sergeant Wayman, he's passed away since then. He died about 9 years later than this date. He come running over all out of breath, and he said, hey, you guys, did you see? He says, I was standing at he's security, eh? He's standing at the front gate. He said, did you see that thing come over? He says, I was at the front gate of the dry. He says, just standing there and having a smoke. He said, big as life. He says, I never believed in these things. He said, a big circle thing, he says, and a big bottom. He says, what a fantastic sight, and not even a hum out of it, just like a ghost moving along. And he says, not only that, he says, but I seen it when it went over the transformer house, and he said, all these flashes as all the knives kicked out. He said, I seen that too. He says, they must be going to have trouble tonight someplace. He didn't know that it was connected to the concentrator. So we're all talking to Sergeant Wayman, and I said, I phoned the radar base. He was excited, we're excited. None of us did anything the rest of the night except sit down and talk about what we had just witnessed. And the radar base, of course, they got in touch with me the following day. They phoned me at home, knowing that I had made a few other reports from before this time and this same year. They knew who Don Campbell was. So, to make a long story short, the next day we found out there was about 15 witnesses at the concentrator. The people near the power station, you're not allowed to go in, except the two operators. They didn't see the knives actually opening up, but the two electricians on duty had to unlock the gates, go in there, and push one knife in at a time, and by walkie-talkies to the remote station, and say, okay, power's on number 1, power's on number 2. You don't push all the knives in too rapidly because you can get a burnout. And again, there's the next day that the official reason, or the reason that the power went out in the logbook of the superintendent at that time was logged in their book, because they have to report this to New York. When they have a shutdown, it costs $20,000, $30,000 in lost production. It has to be noted in a logbook, the superintendent. He was not on duty that night, but when he came on duty the next day, he was a steady day man, he was told all the circumstances. So the official reason for the power outage at 10:30 that evening, for 15 minutes before they got everything kicked back in, and the loss of production, was an unidentified flying object over the Coppercliff complex, doing a double circle around the middle stack, then over the concentrator, and then over the dry, and then over the back of the plate shop with 18, 20 witnesses, over the CIL building, disappearing in a northeasterly direction. And as told by Don Campbell, who had phoned the radar, and they confirmed that it sped away at 22,000 miles an hour from a cruising speed of 10, 15 miles an hour in the yard, which was just poking, and then when it angled up and left, it just became a star. And then if you looked up, that's what you think it was, just a little white star. This is one of my favorite stories because so many people looked at it, and the welders that used to kid me and say, there's UFO Don, the guy that goes out at night with different people and sees UFOs, and when they all seen it and spread it to all the other 50, 60, 70 welders, there was no more kidding around about UFO Don anymore, because there was 18, 20 people, all with eyes like me, looking up at an object with a red and green light and witnessing for their first time in their life a genuine UFO, not a Piper Cub or a Cessna flying 10, 15 feet over the company property at 10:30 at night and causing an outage of electrical power and everything, and documented by the superintendent. To my opinion, they were studying our nickel veins and our water routes and everything in this district.
So the case of Donald Campbell is truly amazing, and it's not the only one. There are many others. Here's another case in which a UFO hovered over an Inco train, causing physical effects. It seemed, again, once to be interested in the dump.
Conductor and engineer aboard an Ingo slag train. I don't remember the number. They were on 4 to 12 shift. It was their last pouring at 11:15 p.m. And they parked the engine, took the pantograph down as they always do, put the emergency lock, checked their air pressure, 200 pounds, and everybody's ready to start pouring. And they felt the conductor had his arm on the sill like they always do on the right-hand side going up, felt the heat on the upper part of his arm, and there's a little windowsill just above to keep the rain off their head. When he stuck his head out a little further, he looked up, and there was a circular craft which he said was 40 to 50 feet roughly in diameter, and it didn't have the light on right when he looked at it. It was just off, And then all of a sudden the beam of light came on. And then this really created some excitement. And right away he said to his conductor, look out the window on your side. Conductor looked out the left-hand side of the window, looked up and says, oh my God, it's a UFO, it's a UFO. And he said the excitement went on for about 5 minutes. The three guys that were putting the pails of water to get the crust out of the slag bowls, they all stopped work. Everybody, they had a better view than the engineers. They're all looking up, UFO, UFO, UFO. And there's one Italian guy up there, real accent, and he was yelling too, UFO, UFO, UFO. It's like spaghetti, spaghetti, you know. It was cute, and everybody's excited. And it stayed there about 5 minutes, and everybody just quit working. Nobody's dumping the engines, nothing. Then the UFO just raised above, gentle as it come down, turned off its beam of light, flew away. But this was about a 5-minute sighting from 3 at the slag dump, plus the engineer and the conductor. When they got down to showers that night, it was about 5 after 12 when everybody checks in, when they walk from their station to the dry. And that was the talk, and number one dry that night was the conductor, engineer, and 3 slagmen all see UFO over the dump. There was quite some excitement. And this is nice to see witnesses, you know, that they're not imagining things when a UFO comes out of the sky and you feel the heat on your arm. It's parked above before you even start to pour the slag out. You know there's something wrong when you feel the heat coming from above instead of from down below. So that was an exciting night for them. I only wish that I was there, but all we heard was in the dry. It was the last run, probably about 10:45, because that's the time they park. It takes a half hour to dump. Be 11:15 on their way down. They'd be in the main lower yard at 11:30, because that's the schedule they were on. So that's another UF incident at Inco. Approximately 1969 and a half, maybe 70.
And yet another case in which a UFO hovered or almost seemed to land right on top of the Inco water tanks, the water tanks that fed to the mine. So this UFOs are apparently interested in all aspects of this mine area.
Okay, here's another one of the stories that I wasn't directly involved with, but 2 men that check all the yards, and well, they're actually, what they're supposed to do is check the water tank for water levels, pressures. They have a water tank out there. It's about 100 feet in diameter. It was built by subcontractors in the early 60s. Supplies water, drinking water and plant water to all the plant. And it has a few lights shining up on the side of it. It's kind of lit up. It's on the side of a high hill up there. Anyway, this particular night, these 2 guys are sitting out on the roof having their lunch at 3 in the morning, legal time, 3 to 3:30. And they're eating their lunch, and they see this light coming in from a distance. It's coming closer and closer, and they say, gee, it looks like a helicopter coming. And there's a red light, and there's a white light on it, and they're not thinking too much of it, but when it gets closer, they realize that it's silent. And it ends up parked right over the water tank, which is about 100 feet in diameter, and they said the edges of this craft were as wide from edge to edge. And they thought it was actually so low, at one point in time, they actually thought it landed on the tank, but it wasn't. There was a space in between. And it's sitting there, and they're practically choking on their food. They can hardly swallow. They're saying, you seeing what I'm seeing? And they said, yeah, boy, oh boy. So they watched it for about 5-6 minutes, and not too much comments. They're just watching this craft. And then the red light came on, and the white blinking light, blink, 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 and it just raised off, and in about 10 seconds, off it went into the outer space. And they knew then, at that point in time, they said, we've just seen a UFO. They were all excited and told everybody about the next day. And they had a buddy who was out at a little bit of a party. He had a few beers out at Lively, and he's coming home at 3 o'clock in the morning. And when they went to relate this story to their buddy in Sudbury, a few days later, he says, well, I know what you guys are talking about. He said, I was coming home about 3 o'clock in the morning. He said, I did have a couple under my belt. He says, but I pulled my car right over. He says, right off the road and right onto the gravel, because he said, I seen this light coming out of the sky. And he said, I could see the water tank from the road, he says, which is only about 1,500 feet in. And he said, I could see this thing coming right down. He said, my God, is this a helicopter going to land on top of the water tank at the iron ore plant? So he says, I watched with great interest. And he says, watched it. He said there was really nothing more to see except that this thing was just sitting there with this, with the light shining on. You could see that it's not a helicopter, that it looked round, disc shaped. The lights aren't that powerful, but you could see that it wasn't an airplane. He said, I watched it the whole 5-6 minutes, like you guys told me. He said, and I seen it lift off, and I seen the red light come on, the white light come on, and I seen it disappear. And then he said, I traced it, And as it went up into the heavens, it just became a little white star. He said it just blended in with the rest of the skyscape. So he said, I know you guys aren't lying to me. He says, I seen it that night too. I hadn't been coming home at 3 in the morning. He said, I thought, am I really seeing what I'm seeing? He says, because I was at a party. He says, and I was quite interested in it.
And there was yet another case in which a UFO drained the power lines. This is in 1968. Most of these cases were 67, 68 around this time. And in this case, the UFO hovered over the power lines and drained them, causing a power outage. Here's one case. The main witness is Jim Betts. This occurred on October 23rd, 1975, in which a UFO was hovering over the nearby Murray Mine slag heap in Sudbury. And I'll just let him describe what he saw in his own words.
Okay, hi, my name is Jim Betts, and I was transferred to Levac from 1958 from Sudbury. And as the years went by, in 1972, I transferred to McCready West Mine, close to Levac. And I've been working on there for about 15, 20 years on heavy machinery equipment. So to make it a little shorter, one night, October the 23rd, 1975, approximately about 12:20, I was working 4 to 12 shift on that week. And that particular night, when I was driving home, close to Sudbury, at Mary Mine on the Levac Old Highway, when I was driving past the railroad tracks, on my left-hand side, I had seen something quite bright, which I thought was the moon. And then I got thinking there for a few seconds, and I was still driving on the highway, slowing down. And I looked on my right-hand side, and I could see the moon there. And that night was very clear. So I drove slowly underneath the old underpass, close to Coppercliff. And when I passed that, I could still see the moon on my right-hand side. And I was slowly driving down again towards the old slide dump. And there was a conveyor belt that was going across the highway at that time. And there was a kind of a little stretch there, pretty straight there, I would say, I guess. And then I noticed that light there where I had seen just a few minutes before. It was kind of a standing stop there, and it was right above an aerial, and I think it could have been, it must have been a radio lantern or something. It was quite high anyway. And I could see that object there, maybe, I don't know, from guessing roughly maybe 1,500 feet above it. And it was still. And I had my window down, and I couldn't hear any noise. And as I was driving, going towards it for a little ways, it kind of, I had a feeling it was kind of draining my mind or something. And I got even closer, and then there was a right-hand turn on that road at that time, going by the old Belton Hotel we used to call. And as I was getting close to the Belton Hotel, this object here just took off there within seconds. With a flash there, and it seemed to me that it disappeared on its way down Elm Street. In other words, to explain it more a little closer, was somewhere from my mill hall coming down to the old YMCA there, coming down Elm Street. So I stopped at the corner there, just close to the mine mill hall, and to see what I stopped there for a minute or two just to see if I could see anything else. And then all of a sudden it came right back, just like a flash. And it came right above my car there. Well, I'd say maybe roughly maybe, I don't know, maybe 2,000 feet high or somewhere, yeah. And it stopped again. Just a couple blocks past the Mine Mill Hotel. Yeah, Mine Mill Hall, I should say. Anyway. And then I stayed there for another couple of minutes to watch it, which at that time it was on my left-hand side. And then it could have been there maybe 15, 20 seconds. It was very short time that it was there. And then it disappeared again the same way as it did the first time.
So many cases. There are just so many cases over this area. Here's another one. It occurred on October 12th, 1996, when two boys saw a UFO once again over the Inco smokestacks. And this is something they seem to be very interested in. Another case which occurred around the same time, also same area. This comes from a witness by the name of FL, and I'll just quote the witness directly. As he says, it was either 4 or 5 years ago. I'd have to check back. We do keep records of when I was working. They had me put on a graveyard shift for the winter, and I was patrolling the tailings area. And as I was coming back, I had just shut off a spotlight because I was checking a pipeline, and I happened to glance up into the sky, and I noticed a light, a bright light, come basically straight down. I saw it go through the clouds. The clouds were sort of a wispy reddish color because it was 4:10 in the morning. It went down, it went behind a light tower where the old Frood mine is, or the Murray mine is, and went back down in behind the hills. And that's what I saw. There was no trail of any kind, no vapor trail, no light, no nothing. I was really shocked to see it. There are case after case of this. I honestly can't cover them all. There was one on March 26, 1970, where an object apparently made the news as it hovered over the Vicunis and Levac mines, and many other cases. Here's just one more in which a witness by the name of Ted Williams also saw this cigar-shaped object hovering over the Inco smokestacks in 1999.
Okay, last Wednesday at about 17 minutes to 12 noon, not a cloud in the sky or anything like that, and I seen this little cigar thing going by. No noise, I'm in Garson, by the way. No sound, no smoke, nothing, eh? And it went by, I watched it for about 12 minutes. Okay, so I seen this thing, like a little cigar thing, bright white, very bright, and I followed it all the way. I lost it in the Inco smokestack. Okay, so I turned around. It was two of my buddies there with me, and we turned around after I lost it in the smoke. That was the only smoke in the sky. It was a clear day. And I go back, and I turn around, and I'm talking to them a little bit, and I'm saying, well, what do you guys think that was, and everything, you know? And we were talking about it, trying to discuss what it could have possibly been. I turn around, it's back in the same spot where I seen it, not more than like maybe 3 minutes after I lost it. And followed the same pattern again, the same path right away, watched it for another 10, 12 minutes. And nobody else in Sudbury reported seeing this? I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to say anything. I watched the news because I figured maybe somebody else would say something, and nobody did.
Yeah, you could probably write a book about what happened, and is probably still happening at Inco. Very, very interesting. But again, not the only area which is having all kinds of crazy activity. One UFO mine encounter that generated a lot of attention occurred at the Karnes City uranium mine. This was in the summer of 1971, and the main witness is Michael Harvey. He's a Conoco oil employee. He and 6 others were working the night shift at this 85-acre open pit uranium mine west of Karnes City. They were using a Caterpillar tractor, a Caterpillar 657B earth mover, and had reached a depth of about 210 feet when suddenly, as Harvey says, the entire area became lit up as if it was daylight. There was this bright, bright light hovering very low level over the mine. It was far too bright to even look at. And I'll just quote Michael Harvey here directly. This is Michael Harvey talking. The light was so bright that I had to squint because it hurt my eyes. I remember hearing a high-pitched hissing noise, and the hair on my arms stood on end. I was so scared I fell to the ground and started praying. This is what all the mine workers did. Everyone was just froze until the light finally dimmed enough where they could actually see it. And as Michael Harvey says, and again I'm quoting, "What I saw amazed me. The object was round, and the bright light was coming from the center of the bottom of the UFO. Around the perimeter of the craft were hundreds of penlight-size light beams that alternated in all colors of the spectrum. I was crying and shaking, and so was everyone else." The next day, Michael Harvey and the other miners talked about the UFO to the next shift, who ridiculed them mercilessly. But Harvey and the other mine workers got the last laugh, and when they were able to prove how this incident actually happened. As Michael Harvey says, and again I'm quoting, "There is a vein of uranium ore that runs from George West, Texas to almost Texarkana, Texas. When determining where to place a mine, the following steps are accomplished. 1. A geologist with a Geiger counter flies over the area and finds the highest radiation reading. 2. Drilling trucks are sent out and core samples are drilled to determine the highest concentration of uranium ore. These core samples are drilled in a grid pattern, and every core sample is given a tracking number and logged in, showing the concentration and amount of uranium present. 3. The open pit mine is then laid out according to these core samples. When this incident happened, we were about 2 feet away from a layer of hard rock called the tap rock that lied directly on top of the uranium ore. The uranium ore varied in depth from 6 to 18 inches and had about the same color as low-grade coal. 2 days after this incident, the tap rock was removed to expose the uranium ore. We were astounded to find that all the uranium ore was now a chalky white substance that had no radioactivity at all. There was a 250-foot diameter circle of this chalky material in the center of the pit. Outside the circle, the uranium ore was still as potent as before the incident. Core samples don't lie. This chalky material was a uranium before the incident. Many a night I have laid in my bed thinking about what happened. I think the UFO needed the uranium for some reason." And I have to agree, they're definitely hovering over uranium mines quite a bit. This is the only case where apparently these things that we know of have taken the uranium or drained it of its power. Many, many cases. So now I want to move on to another type of case, and these are cases in which mines have been visited repeatedly. There's at least 4 or 5 of these types of cases, 4 or 5 mines that have been repeated visibly. I imagine most of them have, but there are these 4 or 5 we know of. One is the Kennecott Strip Copper Mine, one of the world's largest open excavations. This case comes from MUFON. It occurred on January 18th, 1975 at Salt Lake City, Utah. This comes from a patient at Shriners Hospital. And I'll just read his testimony, which he submitted to MUFON. "I was 15 years old when this incident happened. I was in a ward that had a panoramic view of the entire valley. My childhood dream was to become a pilot, and I loved watching airplanes coming and going from the Salt Lake City International Airport at night. I was watching the airplanes at the airport on a clear night, I would guess around 10 p.m. at night. The airport was maybe 8 miles from the hospital. About another 15 miles to the southwest of the airport is the large Kennecott Strip copper mine. I began to notice these round orange objects that seemed to be hovering over near the mine. Given the distance of about 25 miles from the hospital, these lights had to be extremely bright. The number kept changing from just 1 or 2 to as many as 6 or 7. Other kids on my side of the ward also started watching them after I pointed them out. I also called to a nurse's aide to come and look at the lights. This went on for around 15 to 20 minutes. The lights would appear somewhat slowly. They just didn't flash on, and they disappeared in the same way. I know these were not airplanes or helicopters. Gradually, the number of lights diminished to one or two, and then there was nothing. After a few minutes of not seeing any lights, everyone lost interest and started going to sleep. I closely watched for another 30 minutes without seeing anything else. This incident has been in the back of my mind all these years. I often wonder if anyone else near Kennecott Mine saw the lights. If you have any information from this time period regarding these lights or orbs, I would like to know. So yeah, this comes from a 17-year-old teenage boy who saw this with a bunch of other people, including at least one adult, for some time of these objects over the Kennecott Mine. He reported it to MUFON. He later did become a commercial pilot, as he had dreamed being, and that's when he reported it to MUFON. There were no other witnesses to this incident. However, 10 years later, another witness did report seeing UFOs over the same mine, over the Kennecott Strip copper mine. And this report was actually made to the National UFO Reporting Center, and I'd like to read you the report from the witness himself. Again, this is the witness talking. Mid to late summer 1985, walking south from my house with a friend to his house, we noticed a green light coming from the West Mountains directly over Kennecott Copper Mine, heading east. My friend and I noticed it and stopped where we were and watched it come toward us. I never heard a sound coming from the craft until it was almost directly above us. The only sound I heard was a kind of buzzing or rumbling, and you could almost feel it going right through you. We both agreed it was probably somewhere between 500 to 1,000 feet high. I remember it was hard to gauge how high because of its immense size. We also guessed it to be about 1,000 feet long and approximately 250 to 300 feet across. There were 3 distinct, separate cigar-shaped craft, not visibly or structurally joined, but moved as one. Each one was separated from the other by about 25 to a 50-foot space. We lived in the flight path to Salt Lake International Airport, so I've seen planes come fairly low, but I've never seen anything close to this size in the sky, even down low. The witness says these objects were green-blue in color and eventually disappeared over the Wasatch Mountains. Shortly after this incident, his friend came running over and reported that he also saw this whole sighting as well. And not only that, shortly after that, the police came up and were driving through the area and stopped the boys and asked them if they had seen any UFO activity recently. The boys reported their sighting, and the policeman reported that, yeah, he had received several reports of objects in this area. Another mine that has been visited repeatedly is the Ogonico Cobalt mine. The first cases occurred in 1954 or so, but there was an interesting prelude to all this. One of the mine workers who worked there, Dan Hellens, when he started working there, he received a warning from a friend who warned him that UFOs, saucers as he called them, were bound to arrive. He was going to see UFOs because they had an affinity with the cobalt found in this area. And this turned out to be very prophetic because it wasn't long after that there were, in fact, a number of sightings over this mine. And the first occurred on December 26, 1954, the day after Christmas, when Willie St. Jean, who was a hoist man at the mine, said he saw this very bright object hovering over the mine. It was a bright disk, and it sent down this silver-blue cone of light. He was in his car, or actually he was outside at the time. He ran for the safety of his car because he was afraid this thing was coming to get him. It was only 150 feet overhead, very, very bright. Finally, when it stayed there, he called the local newspaper reporter, John Hunt, and said, and I'm quoting here, "John, for God's sake, get out here. There's a flying saucer overhead spilling light all over the place. I've got to get out of here before it gets me." So John Hunt lives about 3 miles away. He hops in his car, drives as fast as he ever has over to this area, and doesn't see it at first because this object was moving around at this point. But it wasn't long before this thing comes swooping down, and he sees it too. It comes very low. It goes high again, and then came very low. Willie St. Jean was telling John Hunt this thing came down so low, it scared the blazes out of him. At some point, John Hunt takes out his flashlight and signals it. The object moves off again. So the reporter calls some other people who are in the town, tells them about this. This news is spreading out through town, and it's not long before other people arrive. At this point, John Hunt says, "Oh, it looks like it's gone." But no, they climb a ladder and see that there are now, these lights are hovering on the lake itself, on the nearby lake. So this is a long, drawn-out sighting that was seen by a lot of people over the Agnico Cobalt mine. And it wasn't long before there was another sighting. It was, in fact, just 2 weeks later, there was a very dramatic sighting on January 7th, 1955. This was in the evening again. And this time the witness was John Hunt again. And there was another witness as well, a truck driver, Al Jennings, and a third witness, Ray Johnson, who was a mechanic at the mine. And all three of them saw this bright white disk hovering for 2 hours over the mine at this lake. The lake is called Karnes Lake. And the RCAF sent over a jet, and apparently in search of this thing, and they were later contacted about it, but they made no comment. They preferred not to talk about it. So this Agnico mine has been repeatedly visited. A third event occurred the very next day at 4:30 a.m. when a miner by the name of Maurice Parent and his family saw another UFO hovering over the neighborhood house. Outside they looked and they saw two extremely bright objects. This would be, they lived in the mining town next to this area. And these objects darted around for 2 hours and then took off straight upwards. So yeah, an enormous number of cases at certain mines. But probably the most visited area in terms of UFOs in mines is what's going on in Arizona. It's just incredible. Arizona is the leading producer in the United States of copper. There are at least a dozen cases of UFOs hovering over a wide variety of mines in this pretty closely defined area in Arizona, which is, Pima, Clifton, Morenci, Tucson, these areas. One case comes from Warren, Arizona. It occurred on March 6, 1980, when a disk was seen hovering over the mine tailings in Warren, Arizona. Witnesses watched this disk turn on edge and fly to the south. In total, it was in view for about 8 minutes. Here's a case which occurred very close to the Green Valley copper mines. This is in Green Valley, Arizona. Occurred on August 20th, 2018. The witnesses are a lady and her husband. They were driving near their home. There are some abandoned mines near their home where there are a bunch of mine tailings, which have created, small hills with little plateaus on top. So they're driving near their home and they see this glowing red cylinder. It's hovering over the mine tailings behind their homes. And the moment she sees this thing and thinks, "Oh, that's unusual," it starts darting back and forth, getting first closer to them and then farther away. And it's appearing and disappearing. And suddenly it zooms right in front of them, about 50 feet away in front of them. She could see the shape of it now as cylindrical, very tall and thin, almost like a tower, and very bright. It looked like a neon light, she said, and it felt almost alive. Very impressed her. Her husband is very skeptical and didn't want to talk about it, but even he said, "Wow." And she ended up reporting this case to MUFON, and it's one of many, many cases in this Arizona area. Here's a case which occurred at a Tucson gold mine. This is on December 28th, 2001, and the witness's name is Barry. And this is what Barry says, and I'm quoting, "I'm a regular guy. I'm a 4-year veteran of the Army. I have an associate's degree in structural engineering and an advanced degree in heavy equipment operation." So yeah, maybe not a regular guy. He's pretty well educated there. So a good good witness, and he was running the night shift at this Tucson gold mine using a track hoe to feed an incinerator. And he had a coworker who was also, pretty accomplished. He was a retired Special Forces major. And suddenly this immense craft, it looked, as Barry says, almost a mile wide. It was huge. It had weird lights all over it and it appears over the mine. And the cloud ceiling was about 9,500 feet, so they know it was lower than that. So it had to be absolutely huge. And as Barry says, and I'm again quoting Barry, "My esteemed colleague got a deathly white sheen to his face and would not come out of his personal jeep. He was scared and he was babbling like a child. Me, I turned the track hoe to face it and kept flicking my daylighters in the hope they could come and see who was behind those lights. I felt at ease, no panic. You see, I felt as these were my friends, like we had met before." So this object stayed for quite a while. It would appear and disappear, but never too far from the gold mine it was hovering over, as Barry says. And finally just moved off. The next night, 2 military attack Cobra helicopters hovered over his work site and just stayed there for a very long time and weren't moving away. And it got to be really annoying, so Barry finally just turned on the floodlights on these guys, at which point the helicopters circled the site and headed directly towards the gold mine where the UFO had been hovering. And Barry was really impressed by this sighting, and apparently so was his coworker, because 2 years later Barry's coworker quit and made it clear that he never wanted to talk about this incident ever again and to not contact him about it. But Barry couldn't get the incident out of his mind and eventually reported it to the National UFO Reporting Center. Many cases in Arizona. Here's one which took place at the open pit copper mine in Silver Bell, Arizona. This is a very large copper mine. This occurred on June 14th, 1953, and it was around sundown when a group of rodeo cowboys saw this huge glowing object, spherical in shape, hovering over the open pit mine. And they thought it might be a balloon, except they decided, no, it's not, because it wasn't moving at all. And as they looked at it, it actually appeared to be aluminum in texture, and it was about 100 feet wide. And then it moved over to the copper butte and hovered over that. And finally it darted away very quickly, turning a deep blue-green. Wasn't over yet. This object stops over Elroy, the town of Elroy, and at this point it resumes its original metallic aluminum-like appearance. And they got some binoculars out and observed this thing. They couldn't see any real detail other than it was a aluminum sphere. And suddenly this thing, it didn't move away as far as they could tell. It just winked out. Here's a case which took place on the evening of June 3rd, 1964 in Copper Mine. This is in Page, Arizona at the Zontelli Western Mining Company. How this happened was mine foreman Edward Coyle sees this reddish glowing egg-shaped object about 500, maybe 1,000 feet over the mine. He watched it as it moved off to the northwest. He decided to notify the owners of the mine, who were Pat and June Patterson. They owned the mine and the copper mine trading post on the Navajo reservation. And the sighting wasn't over yet. Later that night, Frank Howard, who was the night watchman at the mine, also saw a UFO, probably the same mine. It was this time slightly off to the south of the mine, hovering there in place, apparently watching the mine. One mine that's been repeatedly visited is the Pima copper mine. There are at least 3 cases in this area. One occurred just after midnight on July 22nd, 1971, when an anonymous witness saw, quote, a flat disc with a teardrop-shaped tail, and it was glowing bluish, glowing light all around it, and it was moving about 45 miles per hour, not that fast, over the waste dumps of the Pima mine. This is about 30 miles south of Tucson. This craft rocks back and forth. It was clearly under intelligent control. It was darting at right angles and then zipped away. And only a few days earlier, the witness had seen UFOs in the same area, but this was the really close-up sighting right over the mine, and he definitely believes they are coming for the mine itself. But as he says, there are several very high voltage, high power lines supplying power to the mine, plus a continual thermal updraft from the open pit copper mine. Another case occurred just 9 years later in November of 1980. The witness in this case is George Parks, who works the night shift at the BHP copper mines in San Manuel, Arizona. And on this evening of July 22nd, 1971, he's driving home. He's just left work, and he's, as he says, and I'm quoting now, "Coming around the bend at Oracle Junction, I saw a metallic craft hovering not far from the road. I saw 7 windows. Behind every window stood a figure. An instant later, it flew off." So this is the first of what will turn out to be actually many humanoid cases. And this may sound incredible, but it turns out this witness, George Parks, is a very good witness. He had been in the military for more than 20 years. He's never seen anything like this. Following this incident, he actually joined MUFON and became a field investigator. And it wasn't long after that he became the Pima County Section Director for MUFON, and later actually became the Arizona State Director for MUFON. And as he says, as George Parks says, "I'm still looking for answers." Here's a weird case which occurred apparently over Pima. This is on August 29th, 2017. A man was actually in a jet at 35,000 feet. He was flying from San Diego, California to Atlanta, Georgia, and looking down could see this enormous open pit copper mine in Pima, Arizona. He recognized it. But what really impressed him was what appeared to be a disc, a metallic disc. And I'll just quote the witness here as he says, "I noticed a disc at low altitude near the mine. It was a saucer-shaped disc. It stood out in the terrain, hovering." Yeah, a weird case. But it doesn't surprise me because, again, these mines are being repeatedly visited. And here's another mine, the Lavender Pit copper mine. It's huge. And this has at least 2 cases. One occurred on June 27th, 1947. This is about 1 week before the Roswell UFO crash. It's a great case. The main witness, is John A. Petch. He's an electrician employed at the Phelps Dodge copper mines in Bisbee, Arizona. He and 2 other workers at the mine saw this silver mirror disc-shaped object. It was totally silent, it was wobbling, and it moved overhead. And it moved right overhead and to where another group of miners saw it. About 1.5 miles away, 3 other mine employees, including John Rylance, an electrician, as well as I.W. Maxwell and Milton Luna, saw this object move lower and lower until it actually landed on a little hill on the mine, which they had nicknamed Tin Town. Vernon C. McMinn, he was the gang boss for this group of electricians who observed the object. And this sighting got out to reporters, and he told reporters that several other miners also saw the same object, and that they were all reliable witnesses. Turns out they weren't the only witnesses. There was another person, Major George B. Wilcox, who was in the Army at this time. He observed 8 or 9 disc-shaped objects moving at very low elevation, approaching the Bisbee area at the time of this mine encounter. He said they moved in single file, evenly spaced, in sort of a dipping, rocking motion. So they were clearly on a mission over these mines in Bisbee. And in 1980, they returned for a repeat visit. This is many decades later. The witness is, again, an excellent witness. He is a former rocket scientist who worked as a telemetry collector and analyst for the NSA, National Security Agency. He says he was at a gas station next to the Lavender Pit copper mine in Bisbee, Arizona, when he saw a metallic oblate spheroid object about 100 feet in diameter, 250 feet overhead. It was totally silent except for a low hum. He stared at it for a few seconds and turned to the gas station owner and said, "Do you see that?" "I sure do," is how the gas station owner replied. This object was so low, the witness felt like he could probably take a rock and hit it. He had the impulse to do so, but decided not to do it in case it was perceived as a hostile act. Instead, just watched this thing. And he and the other guy really felt like they were both being observed. And other people saw in this thing. There's a road which circles the whole Lavender Pit copper mine. And they saw other cars driving by, stopping, bending over, and looking at this thing, and then speeding away. After a short while, this object accelerated away quickly towards the Queen Mine in Bisbee. And it wasn't long after that a jet fighter appeared, and this jet fighter was only a few hundred feet high and was apparently following this object because it was going exactly where this object had gone. And as the witness says, our government knows about these things. Who is kidding who here? A very famous and well-known sighting occurred over the Morenci, Arizona copper smelting plant. And this involved, again, a number of witnesses. This was on October 23rd, 1980. At least 5 workers in the Morenci, Arizona copper plant saw this dull black boomerang-shaped object, and it approached right over the smokestacks of this copper plant and hovered over them directly, sending down a bright beam of light into each and every one of these smokestacks. And not only that, it stopped over one of these smokestacks and sent down this little probe or fireball or something into the smokestack itself. And at one point, these objects were moving away, and one of the workers, Joe Navarez, mentally called out, "Don't go away, come back, I want to see you again." And one of these objects actually stops, this object stops, makes a U-turn and comes back really close, hovers briefly, and moves off again. So this incident, received a lot of publicity. And actually, according to the International Center for UFO Research, which is a small private UFO organization centered in Scottsdale, Arizona, throughout the 1980s, they received a number of reports of UFOs over the Morenci area, over the small town of Morenci. And in one of these sightings, they said it was actually witnessed by hundreds of people, including a bunch of people at the Morenci High School, who described it as being several football fields in size. So many cases in Arizona. But we need to move on to the humanoid cases now, and this is where it gets really interesting. I've 6 cases involving humanoids, not counting the one that I'd already cited above. And here's another humanoid case, which took place in actually Morenci, Arizona. And I'm not sure what to make of this case. This comes from MUFON. It occurred in Clifton, Arizona, at August 11, 2017, apparently at the Morenci copper mine. And I'll just quote the witness here directly. "At work in a copper mine in Morenci, Arizona, a friend of mine saw this bright light through the window. He went outside and took a picture. A few days later, while showing the picture to a friend, it was enlarged, and you could make out a small human-like figure on the left side of the glowing object. The fence in the picture is about 6 feet high. Behind it is a laydown yard. Behind the laydown yard is an 8 to 9 foot berm. Past that, it drops off around 100 feet. So he's saying there's a cliff right behind all of this. And you can see this little green humanoid in this photo. And I can't comment on the photo. You'll have to make up your own mind about it. But I can tell you that this area has been repeatedly visited over and over again. And I doubt most people know that, except for those who work there. Another humanoid case is actually very well known in the UFO literature. The main witness is Stephen Michalik, and this occurred on May 20th, 1967, when this guy, Michalik, approached a landed UFO. The door was open. He could hear voices talking inside, and he actually called out and tried to talk to it. They did not respond. And finally, this door closes and this object takes off. He's pretty badly burned. He suffers, burns on his face and chest, and immediately has a headache and vomiting and suffers all kinds of symptoms: dizziness, nausea, diarrhea, weakness, swelling of joints, weight loss. His blood count drops. It's a long, complicated case. I won't get too into it. But what's very interesting is where this object landed. Stuart Hunt did a study of it. Stuart Hunt was up from the Department of Health and Social Welfare and found significant levels of radium-226, which could not be produced naturally. And Stephen Michalik returned to this area and found two strange W-shaped silver bars and chunks of silver where this object had hovered. And these were also analyzed by Brian Cannon, a researcher, who found that the silver concentration was much higher than normal, than normally would be found in native silver, such as sterling or coinage. And the metal showed signs of heating and bending and radioactivity, and had fine quartz crystals and small crystals of a uranium silicate material in pitchblende and feldspar and hematite embedded into it, so not naturally forming. And is a very well-known case, which may not be directly tied to a mine, but it's definitely one case of a UFO hovering over a mining area and causing weird changes. Here's another case which comes from Canada. This is Caledonia in Ontario, and it occurred at 2:30 a.m. on June 13th, 1967. The main witness is Carmen Cuneo, who worked at this mine in Caledonia, and he saw two craft hovering. One of them was 12 feet above the lower part of the mine dump. It was about 36 feet long, cigar-shaped with 4 windows, and it had this arm-like device, this boom extended from one end. And the other object was hovering higher up, and it was much smaller and appeared to be a 15-foot wide saucer-shaped craft. Was even more interesting than these two craft was that Carmen Cuneo saw 3 small men, humanoid apparently, wearing miners' hats with kind of lights on them. And again, this is in the middle of the night. And they were standing under the arm that was extending out of this object. He observed them for about 10 minutes, long enough to see that these were not normal and that these were saucer men. And he went to get another witness. He got his friend Merv Hannigan and called him over. And by this time, the humanoids were gone, but the objects were still there. They watched it for about 20 minutes. At about 3 o'clock, 3:05, the objects turned on colored lights and took off to the southwest. They were totally silent, but at dawn they went out there and investigated and did find a large gouge on the ground and some weird oily residue on the trees, on the burdock leaves. The oil was analyzed, but not found to be any type of oil that they could link to a normal oil. So many cases involving humanoids as well. Another case, probably one of the most amazing cases, occurred in Brush Creek, California in 1953. It's a classic case. It's been covered in a number of books, investigated by a number of investigators. Jim and Cora Lorenzen looked into it, Leonard Stringfield, and other researchers. And it all began in 1953, around April, when these 2 miners, John Black and John Van Allen, started seeing UFOs hovering over their mine. They saw it a few times, And then it returned on April 20th and hovered at a pretty low level for a long period of time, right over the mine. And again, a metallic saucer. Precisely, exactly 1 month later, this time May 20th, this object actually landed at the junction of Marble and Jordan Creek, right next to this mine, and takes off. And afterwards, John Black approached, and he could see that there were little 5-inch footprints all over the place in the sand. And he also saw evidence of what looked like a campfire. It was very strange. And it got even stranger because, again, 1 month later, now it's June 20th, this object lands again. This time, John Black sees this person. He thought it was a child at first, at the junctions of Marble and Jordan Creek. And as he approached, he saw that there was this landed saucer right next to it. And this was just a short little humanoid, apparently male. He was wearing green pants, had weird shoes, a weird jacket, and kind of a green cap. He said it was very, very pale, as if he had never been in the sun, and had dark black hair, and was carrying this kind of shiny, weirdly cone-shaped bucket, and gathering water, scooping water up into the bucket. And John Black approached as closely and as silently as he could. He got to within 40 feet when the little man, as he called him, saw him and quickly retreated into the craft. He watched the man just float up right inside. The door closed, and this craft immediately took off. So at this point, they went to town and at Brush Creek and started talking to the local sheriff, whose name was Fred Preston, and slipped out that they had seen this UFO and asked if it was all right. They asked the sheriff if it's all right if it's open season on spacemen because they saw this thing. And they proceeded to relate this encounter to the sheriff. And the sheriff told him that no, but if, this is what he said, I told them they'd better grab it next time so they'll have something to back up their story. He told him not to shoot, but what he did do was contact the Air Force. And the Air Force did show a lot of interest in this case, and this is how this all got very well publicized. Rumors quickly started flying around about how this saucer was coming every month. It would come on exactly the same day for 3 months in a row. And this story got leaked to the press, and there was just this huge media circus. And surprisingly, it was on July 20th, more than 200 people arrived at the Brush Creek mine in hopes of seeing this flying saucer land. And this was a huge media event. There was reporters there. There was serious investigators. There was saucer hunters. And people were setting up snack bars and tables of food and chairs, had brought cameras. And unfortunately, nothing ever showed up. The predicted landing never occurred, and the whole thing was a bust. There was accusations, of course, of hoaxing at this point. But all the people who knew these miners said that no, they were upstanding men who were not super well educated, had never read any science fiction or anything like this. Vi Belcher, the owner of the local store, said that she knew they were, quote, not drinking men. So they were interviewed by Gray Barker and Paul Spade, both of who, during their investigations of this incident, were actually jailed by Fred Preston, the Brush Creek sheriff. And as Gray Barker says, Spade made what I considered an objective investigation and reported that the story was evidently not a hoax. Whatever Black saw, the story sounds almost too good for someone to think up, especially when such a story is credited to an isolated miner who is not likely to be at all well read on science fiction. And a lot of other researchers took note of this case, and there was no evidence of a hoax ever found. Certainly the Air Force seemed very interested. We know this now because of documents released through the Freedom of Information Act. And they did conduct an investigation. And really, for no evident reason that I can find, other than that it's an incredible story, they labeled it a hoax. I don't think so, because there's so many cases like this. Here's a case reported from Jacques Vallée, and this occurred over the French Gulch gold mine in Northern California. The main witnesses are Clint and Jane Chapin, and this first event occurred on the morning of October 30th, 1969, when both Clint and Jane saw this oval-shaped object, silver in color, landed among the trees. And they went over to investigate and found this weird pile of sand, which they collected. And I'll have more to say on this weird pile of sand later. But it was some years later, 7 years later, on December 27th, 1976, they were driving to their property and came upon this egg-shaped object, landed in the road near their home. Clint got out, and after seeing this object, tells Jane to go, who's in the car, to get the gun and give it to him. So she exits the car, at which point she hits an invisible barrier and she's knocked unconscious. At the same time, Clint has his arm pinned behind his back and he's thrown off the road and also knocked unconscious. Both of them woke up to find that they had urinated their pants. They felt very sick, very cold and chilled, and even weeks later felt very sick and were suffering what came to be chronic health effects from this event. This is when they contacted Jacques Vallée, and 1 year later they had another incident on October 13th, 1977. They were working at the mine when they felt an unexplained wave of heat sweep over them. They didn't see anything, but both instantly became ill and started vomiting. And they think this object was harassing them. And as Jane says, following this incident, Clint sweats when sitting on a chair, and at night he turns real red in the face. So it was causing them profound ill effects, physiological effects. On January 14th, 1978, Jane actually saw the beings that were harassing them at this mine, at their gold mine. As Jacques Vallée says, the head was flat with large eyes and a big nose. It was a short humanoid, but apparently not your typical gray. And she's not the only one who saw it. Turned out the neighborhood kid, a 12-year-old boy, saw what he described as an unusual humanoid creature. He became very, very upset about it and traumatized. And these encounters just kept occurring. This being would not leave the Chapins alone. It was 2 years later, on April 4th, 1980, when the Chapins, who are now in their 80s, see this humanoid again. And I'll just quote Jane here. "We turned to go down the road, and there was a skinny thing in the road. He was 4 foot tall and skinny, maybe 90 pounds. And his egg, the UFO, was not 25 feet from us. He took 4 steps toward us, and my hand fell on my gun, and he turned around and walked back. He was in a gray suit, and he left no prints or any prints on the egg. Clint could not move either. Then the thing vanished, and the egg went straight up in the air and turned west." 2 months after this, tragically, Clint Chapin passed away, and Jacques Vallée was able to obtain a sample of this sand that they had originally collected when this object first appeared. And he had it analyzed, and it showed several very unusual properties. And I'll just quote from the analyst who analyzed this weird sand that was left by a UFO. As the analyst says, "The problem with your sand is it's not sand. Perhaps it looks like sand to you, but it's not alluvial sand, or stream sand, or beach sand, or mine tailing sand, or any kind of naturally formed sand. There is some siltstone, some volcanic material. Here is some sulfide-bearing rock, green crystals, feldspar, pyrite cubes. All these fragments are very angular. All the components are common, but they don't belong together. This is a composite of rock fragments and manufactured materials. It's as if somebody has taken minerals from very different areas and ground them together until it looked like sand. An amazing case with amazing physical evidence. Jacques Vallée calls it his, quote, favorite case. And as he says, the Chapins, I was convinced, were not lying. I did believe them, and I still do. So one other humanoid case, and I'll wrap this up. This last case is unsubstantiated, but it's definitely interesting, and it occurred on August 27th, 1989, in an area well known for very deep mines. This is Donetsk, Ukraine, and there are many mines here. I'm not sure what mine this was, but according to the source in this case, an electrical worker was in a mine more than 350 feet below the surface when he saw, quote, two strangers who were standing by an electric train depot. And he knew nobody was supposed to be there. He was alone, so he felt a wave of fear when he saw these things. And he looked at them carefully and could see that they appeared to be studying the equipment in the mine. So he slowly approached, and when he got within shouting distance, he asked, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" And the figures stopped and looked and began to approach him. And this is when he could see that they were clearly not human. As the report reads on this case, they were short creatures, dwarf-like, with sallow facial complexions and features he could not recognize as human. Both were dressed in silvery-colored coveralls, and on their chest they had lighted circles and luminous dots circling around, like the screen on an oscillograph. After standing for a while, the entities turned around and walked away, quickly moving away, then floating just above the ground. In several seconds, they vanished behind a bend in the underground tunnel. So there you go. That's more than 50 cases of UFOs hovering over mines. In some cases, they're affecting the mines. As you see, people have photographed these things, taken moving films. Humanoids have been seen. There's evidence of a cover-up, lots of landing trace cases. I had done a preliminary study of UFOs and mines in my book, Not From Here, Volume 1, but it turned out there was a lot more than I actually thought. And very important cases, I think. I think they're important because these include all kinds of encounters, close encounters of the first, second, and third kind. I think it's important because they've been occurring for over 70 years. I think it's important because these cases provide excellent evidence of UFO reality with all these photographs and landing traces and physical evidence and physiological effects. And thirdly, I think these are important because of the way these objects are showing an interest in minds. I think this points towards the likelihood that we are dealing with extraterrestrials in the classic sense, who are interested in the minerals and the metals of our planet and are mining them. If this phenomena is truly, say, demonic, or perhaps a mysterious interdimensional intelligence that wears different masks, why would it be hovering repeatedly over various mines for over 70 years all across our planet, and sometimes actually taking the metals themselves? So yeah, I think this is good evidence that we're dealing, at least in a lot of these cases, with extraterrestrials in the classic sense. And it's very interesting that they do seem to be particularly interested in cases involving the more rare metals, or the more valuable, I should say. Titanium and uranium is certainly used in atomics. So yeah, that's my presentation. Thanks once again for listening, and keep having fun.